Hello, everyone. This is recording number 11 for Aristotle, a class on the Nicomachean Ethics. Today, I want to talk about two conditions that Aristotle discusses in Book 7 and that he calls superhuman excellence and brutishness. Now, the most general thing to say here is that Aristotle is interested in conditions that are better than virtue. So superhuman excellence is better than human virtue and worse than vice. Brutishness is worse than vice. And that is in and of itself a noteworthy dimension of his ethics. Now, a bit more about superhuman excellence. The name already says that it is superhuman. It is associated with divinity. For Aristotle, that does not mean that hence we should not even aim for it. On the contrary, he thinks we should try to become as much like the immortals as we can. And he expresses this in a quite enigmatic way in a later chapter, in chapter 7 of Book 10, there he quotes from poetry, where it is said, "Mortals you are, think mortal thoughts. Humans you are, think human thoughts." And as it were, contrary to this, Aristotle says, well, no, we should aim to have the best mental states that we can at all attain. And he thinks that human beings have some kind of connection to divinity, and that because of that, it, as it were, makes sense for us to push beyond the boundaries of human excellence, aiming to be as much like the gods as we can. And this is in and of itself already kind of enlightening about the question of why Aristotle is interested in conditions that go beyond the spectrum that is demarcated by virtue and vice. Well, because he doesn't think that there is a kind of fixed boundary for us that is captured by human virtue. We can somewhat push beyond it, only somewhat, and not entirely, because we are still human. But it does make sense for us to aim to be like divinities, at least in some respects, as much as we can. Now, turning now to brutishness. And that expression translates a term in Greek that could also be translated as having the nature of a beast. And that already tells us that, again, this is not a human condition. However, again, Aristotle thinks that there is, as it were, some leeway. There are exceptions. There are going to be some cases where we call something brutish. And his examples are, from today's point of view, quite horrid and in many ways controversial, but one of them has made its way into today's action theory, and I'm just going to mention that example. He says that we call it brutish when someone eats earth or coal. And there are, in fact, strikingly similar examples in Elizabeth Anscombe's hugely influential book, Intention, which was published in 1957 and which single-handedly started today's discipline of philosophy of action. Elizabeth Anscombe says that if someone were to desire a saucer of mud or some mountain ash, and note the similarity between ash and coal and mud and earth, we would take them to be babbling. Or we would somehow postulate a special reason for why they are doing this, why they want this. And that example has made its way into today's discussions of the guise of the good, that account of human action that we already studied a little bit when we discussed Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics. There we looked at this idea that for an agent to be motivated to do anything, something about the action or the pursuit that she is taking up must look good to her, must appear to her under the guise of the good, somehow look good to her. And it has seemed to philosophers that Anscombe's example of someone who desires a saucer of mud may really pose a problem for this fundamental assumption in the philosophy of action, because if there is such a person, then it seems difficult to see what it could be that looks good to her about the saucer of mud. So, in that context, the example has survived and is, as it were, alive and well as something that maybe challenges the fundamental Aristotelian assumption that human agency involves something appearing good to the agent. But in Aristotle, we saw that really the point is to say, well, human psychology can also, as it were, fall apart, or there are conditions that human beings can be in that are in shocking and disturbing ways, not what we expect from how we otherwise know human beings to behave and to be motivated and so on and so forth. And he even thinks that when someone does something brutish, then we don't scold them, we don't blame them, because we are, as it were, perturbed. When someone is vicious, we blame them. But when someone does something brutish, we are disturbed, horrified, and confused. So I just want to end with one question. In modern moral philosophy, it is often assumed that there is a kind of scale of badness where that which is worse than the bad is evil. But nevertheless, it is somehow assumed that to be bad or to be evil, or to do something bad or to do something evil, that is somehow part of human agency. And I just want to raise the question of what it means for someone's approach in ethics if they conceive of what is worse than ordinary badness as somehow outside of the human sphere, namely as brutish.